Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being with us today. I would say that any time that we can get the three of you in front of the American people, whether it's several days before an election or several days after, is extremely useful and can be very productive. So I appreciate the three of you coming and the committee holding this hearing. As we've heard, Americans turn every day to your platforms for a lot of different information. I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Zuckerberg, because the last time he was in front of our committee, I had asked him to share the plenty of Facebook into rural America and help us with our fiber deployments into rural America. And when we see in this COVID environment, we see how important that is. And he followed through with that. I would like to thank him and his company for helping partner with us in West Virginia to get more people connected. And I think that is an essential. I would make a suggestion as well, maybe when we get to the end, when we talk about fines, what I think we could do with these millions and billion-dollar fines that some of your companies have been penalized on. We could make a great jump and get to that last household. But the topic today is on objectionable content and how you make those judgments. So quickly, each one of you, I know that in the Section 230, it says that the term is objectionable content or otherwise objectionable. Would you be in favor of redefining that more specifically? That's awful broad, and that's where I think some of these questions become very difficult to answer. So we'll start with Mr. Dorsey on the how do you define otherwise objectionable, and how can we improve that definition so that it's easier to follow?
Well, our interpretation of objectionable is anything that is limiting potentially the speech of others. A lot of our policies are focused on making sure that people feel safe to express themselves. And when we see abuse, harassment, misleading information, these are all threats against that, and it makes people want to leave the internet, makes people want to leave these conversations online. So that is what we're trying to protect, is making sure that people feel safe enough and free enough to express themselves in whatever way they wish.
So this, a follow-up to that, much has been talked about the blocking of the New York Post. Do you have an instance, or for instance, of when you've actually blocked somebody that would be considered politically liberal on the other side in the political realm in this country? Do you have an example of that to sort of offset where the New York Post criticism has come from?
Well, we don't have an understanding of the ideology of any one particular account, and that is also not how our policies are written or our enforcement taken. So I'm sure there are a number of examples, but that is not our focus. We're looking purely at the violations of our policies, taking action against it.
Yeah, Mr. Zuckerberg, how would you define otherwise objectionable? If not, how would you define it, but how would you refine the definition of that to make it more objective than subjective?
Senator, thank you. When I look at the written language in Section 230 and the content that we think shouldn't be allowed on our services, some of the things that we bucket in otherwise objectionable content today include general bullying and harassment of people on the platform. So somewhat similar to what Jack was just talking about a minute ago. And I would worry that some of the proposals that suggest getting rid of the phrase otherwise objectionable from Section 230 would limit our ability to remove bullying and harassing content from our platforms, which I think would make them worse places for people. So I think we need to be very careful in how we think through that.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Pichai?
Senator, maybe where I would add is that the content is so dynamic. YouTube gets 500 hours per minute of video uploaded on an average any day. Search 15% of queries we have never seen before. To give you an example, a few years ago, there was an issue around teenagers consuming Tide Pods, and it was a kind of issue which was causing real harm. When we run into those situations, we are able to act with certainty and protect our users. The Christchurch shooting, where there was a live shooter, live streaming horrific images, it was a learning moment for all our platforms. We were able to intervene, again, with certainty. And so that's what otherwise objectionable allows. And, I think I think that flexibility is what allows us to focus. We always state with clear policies what we are doing, but I think it gives platforms of all sizes, flexibilities to protect our users.
Thank you. I think, I'm hearing from all three of you really that the definition, is fairly acceptable to you all. In my view, sometimes I think it can go too much to the eye of the beholder type and the beholder being either you all or your reviewers or your AI, and then it gets into a region where maybe it becomes so very subjective. I want to move to a different topic because in my personal conversations with at least two of you, you've expressed the need to have the 230 protections because of the protections that it gives to the small innovators. Well, you sit in front of us, and I think all of us are wondering how many small innovators and what kind of market share could they possibly have when we see the dominance of the three of you. So I understand you started as small innovators when you first started. I get that. How can a small innovator really break through? And what does 230 really have to do with the ability of I'm skeptical on the argument, quite frankly. So whoever wants to answer that, Mr. Zuckerberg, you want to start?
Sure, Senator. I do think that when we were getting started with building Facebook, if we were subject to a larger number of content lawsuits because 230 didn't exist, that would have likely made it prohibitive for me as a college student in a dorm room to get started with this enterprise. And I think that it may make sense to modify 230 at this point just to make sure that it's still working as intended. But I think it's extremely important that we make sure that that for smaller companies that are getting started, the cost of having to comply with any regulation is either waived until a certain scale, or is at a minimum taken into account as a serious factor to make sure that we're not preventing the next set of ideas from getting built.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.